Hi guys, we're here and ready to start lesson part 2 for week 1, day 1. This will be video B, week 1, day 1, video B. And this is about the characteristics of life. In the previous lesson, we were talking about what constitutes a living thing, how they organize, what makes them up. And basically we discussed that all living things have to be made of at least one cell. If they are one cell, they're called single celled or unicellular. And if they're more than one cell, they're called multicellular. And all living things, as of right now, are placed into about 6 different kingdoms because as scientists, we like to have things organized. We like to group things together that have similar traits. So today, this particular lesson is characteristics of life because we were talking in the last video, I kind of alluded to that eventually we're going to talk about what makes something living versus non-living because some living things you kind of think they're not living, but they really are. And so anyway, here we go. And let me go ahead and open up your worksheet for you. And remember that this here is the hyperlink to the page I'm showing you right here on CK12. Um, and I'm going to talk through some of the answers. I'm not going to write them all down, but you'll be able to type some of that in if you do the split screen while you're watching this. So, and if you can't do the split screen, remember you can open up both these on one tab and you can toggle back and forth between the tabs. I do the split screen for video purposes to make it easier for you all to see. So here we're talking about all living organisms from the smallest bacterium. Remember bacterium? I mentioned that yesterday or the previous video. Isn't that a lovely little creature? One cell, and these are different types of extensions of this one cell coming off. Uh, that's a little long for cilia, but sometimes they're called cilia, sometimes they're called flagella. Cilia are the longer ones. This looks like it's multiflagellated, flagella, multiple flagella. So this is a single unicelled organism. To a large whale, which is an organism, which means it's made of cells. Cells are organized into different tissues that carry out the same function. And then when different tissues are organized together, they are classified as organs. And when you have different organs working together to carry out a function like, oh, liver, stomach, then you have like a digestive system. Obviously, this has a respiratory system, circulatory system. So all those organ systems working together constitute an entire organism. All right. So these characteristics of life, these are the qualities that living things must have in order for us to consider them to be alive. All right. And one of the main characteristics is they have to be made of something has to have at least one cell, one functioning cell that can sustain itself and reproduce. Okay. Um, so, for example, all living things are made of cells and they must reproduce to make the next generation. Without these characteristics, there is no life considered. So, biology examines the structure, function, growth, origin, evolution, and distribution of living things. It classifies and describes organisms, their functions, how species come into existence, and the interactions they have with each other and with the natural environment. 4 unifying principles form the foundation of modern biology: cell theory, evolution, genetics, and homeostasis. Most biological sciences are specialized areas of study. Biology includes biochemistry, cell biology, microbiology, immunology, genetics, physiology, zoology, ecology, evolutionary biology, and botany. Biochemistry is the study of the chemicals that make up life. Cell biology is the study of life at the level of a cell. Microbiology is the study of microscopic organisms. Immunology is the study of an organism's resistance to disease. And this goes on and on. So I'll let you read this on your own, the rest of it. So the next question becomes, what is life? Okay. There's not just one distinguishing feature that separates a living thing from a non-living thing. A cat moves, but so does a car. A tree grows bigger, but so does a cloud. A cell has structure, but so does a crystal. Biologists define life by living characteristics that living things share. Something that has all the characteristics of life is considered to be alive. The duck decoy below may look like a duck, act like a duck, and that it floats about, but it's not alive. The decoy cannot reproduce, it can't respond to its environment, or breathe. So here we go. Here are some of the main characteristics we're going to be talking about. An individual living creature is called an organism. There are many characteristics that living organisms share. All living organisms respond to their environment. They grow and change. They reproduce and have offspring. They have complex chemistry, maintain homeostasis, are built of structures called cells, and pass their traits on to their offspring. So, what is an organism? It's an individual living creature. And here I have written, describe the 7 characteristics of life, and that's what you're going to do on these down here. So this is just kind of like a title. So you're going to describe how they respond to their environment, or give me an example of how they respond to their environment. So the example here's, if you step on a rock, it will just lie there. But if you step on a turtle or a snake or something else, it'll move. It may even snap at you. Living things know what's going on around them, and they respond to changes in their environment. An adaptation refers to the process of becoming adjusted to an environment. Adaptations may include structural, physiological, or behavioral traits that improve an organism's likelihood of survival. Therefore, it can reproduce also. So when we talk about responding to the environment, we talk about responding to changes in the environment. And then an adaptation refers to what I'm looking for here is these are structural, physiological, or behavioral traits that improve an organism's survival and its ability to reproduce. The next trait of life is that living things must grow. Now, even single-celled animals will grow because most single-celled animals, they come from one cell splitting into 2. And so they will bulk up a little bit in the cellular world before they get ready to divide and reproduce again. So all living things or all living organisms have the ability to grow and change. A seed may look like a pebble, but under the right conditions, it will sprout and form a seedling that will grow into a larger plant. The pebble, of course, will not grow. Even the smallest bacteria must grow. This bacteria will reproduce by dividing into 2 separate bacterium. If the parent bacterium does not grow, then each subsequent generation will be smaller than the previous generation. So eventually the bacteria will be too small to function. So here with grow and change, the other thing you need to know, and I'm going to help you with this one, single cells will grow until they split, until it is time for them to divide, which is their form of reproduction. Multicellular animals like humans may grow by adding additional cells. Okay, so that's grow and change. Reproduction and have offspring. All living organisms must have the ability to reproduce. Living things make more organisms like themselves. Whether the organism is a rabbit or a tree or bacterium, life will create more life. If a species cannot create the next generations, then the species will go extinct. Reproduction is the process of making the next generation and may be a sexual or an asexual process. So that's your definition for reproduction there. Now, sexual versus asexual reproduction. And sexual reproduction involves two parents and the fusion of gametes, which are also called haploid sex cells from each parent. Haploid refers to the fact that they have half the number of chromosomes that a parent cell, where the parent cells would have a full set. For example, in humans, your body cells have a set of 46 chromosomes. 23 of those chromosomes in the initial zygote that was fertilized, 23 of those chromosomes came from the egg cell, and 23 chromosomes came from the sperm cell. 23 plus 23 gives you a total of 46, which is what your human body cells have, your normal body cells. The reason I'm saying normal body cells is that if you're able to produce sperm or egg cells, those particular cells will only have 23 chromosomes. So haploid means a half set of chromosomes. So basically, sexual reproduction involves two parents and the fusion of gametes. So that's the definition I'm looking for sexual reproduction. And sexual reproduction produces offspring that are genetically unique and increase the genetic variation within a species. So parents, when they form sperm or egg cells, those cells are only getting half of the genetic traits or codes from the parent cells. And so when they recombine, the sperm and egg recombine to form a new individual, there's a blending of those traits. And what happens is, if you think about pea plants, okay, the pollen from one plant or one flower on a plant will fertilize the ovules or eggs in the pistil of the plant, of the flower, and you'll get a bunch of peas developing, new seeds, peas. And what happens is when those genetic codes are recombined, when the half comes from the male and half comes from the female plant, then what happens is when all that DNA gets recombined and different seeds have different DNA compositions, it helps to ensure the survival of that plant species, because hopefully one of those plants will have the right characteristics to survive whatever environment is dealt to them as they continue to grow. So the opposite of sexual reproduction is asexual reproduction, and it involves only one parent, and it occurs without a fusion of gametes, and it produces offsprings that are genetically identical to the parent. So that involves only one parent, and produces offspring that are genetically identical to the parent. Basically, what they're talking about here with asexual reproduction, you're talking about the bacterial cell, the one single cell bacteria. It will copy its DNA and it will split and form two new cells. Okay, so if it copies the DNA exactly, then the two new cells that are formed from the original cell will have an exact copy of the DNA. That's why the offspring's identical to the parents. If you take a plant that likes to create buds, um, and some of them will, like some plants, there'll be like some little buds that will form on them and they can fall off to the ground and they will start to grow. Um, Sometimes I think some cacti may do that. Some of the succulents may do that. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. Ferns have the spores. Um, I'm trying. I think there was one house plant. I think it was called. I can't think of the name of it now, but it would actually produce these little buds, and they would fall to the ground, and they would grow a new plant. So that's a type of asexual reproduction. Okay. Now, complex chemistry. All organisms have a complex chemistry. A flower has a complicated and beautiful structure. So does a crystal. Diamonds are pretty. But if you look closely at the crystal, you see no change. The flower, on the other hand, is transporting water through its petals, producing pigment molecules, breaking down sugar for energy, and undergoing a large number of other biochemical reactions that are needed for the organism to stay alive. The sum of all the chemical reactions in a cell is called metabolism. So basically, here for a complex chemistry, we're going to talk about the sum of all the chemical reactions in a cell. So the cells all have a metabolism. They have to take in food, they have to have a way to digest the food, which happens in the mitochondria, and to extract energy in order for the cell to move, to grow, or to carry out any of its other metabolic processes. So that's why living things have a very complex chemistry. Even the bacteria have a very complex chemistry because they have to have a way to take in water, take in an energy source, and then be able to bulk up enough in cytoplasm and double their organelles, copy their DNA, and then be able to split. Even at a cell, that's still pretty complex. Okay. Maintain homeostasis. Um, An example of this is the human body has a temperature of 37 degrees Celsius, around 98.6. It varies a little bit from person to person. So if you step outside on a cold morning, the temperature might be below freezing. Nevertheless, you do not become an ice cube. You shiver, and the movement in your arms and legs allows you to stay warm. Eating food also gives your body the energy it needs to keep warm. Living organisms keep their internal environments within a certain range. In other words, they maintain a stable internal condition despite changes in their external environment. This process is called homeostasis, and it's an important characteristic of all living things. So maintaining homeostasis basically means that an organism is able to sustain itself. Okay. So for the example of the humans, we go outside, it's cold. We're going to start shivering, which helps to kind of increase the body heat a little bit. If we can't shiver enough and get warm, like on a cool spring morning, we'll go in and get a jacket. We'll put a coat on. Okay. We're trying to maintain our internal balance. That's homeostasis. If it's cold outside, snakes and turtles, they will go find, if there's any sunlight out, they'll go find a warm place so their body heat will come up. They'll maintain homeostasis. Okay. So being able to adjust to your environment to help survive, that's homeostasis. Okay. So when organisms can keep their internal conditions or within a certain range despite changes in the environment, that is called homeostasis. Okay. Another characteristic of living things is that, like I said before, they all have to be made of cells. Okay. All living things are made up of one cell. Okay. Organisms that are very different to just ferns, from fish to elephants, they all look similar at the cellular level. So a cell is the basic unit of structure and function of all living things. Okay. Um, all living organisms are made of one or more cells. Notice the word organism. A simple bacterium will consist of just one cell, whereas you are made of trillions of cells. Okay? And once again, for this characteristic of life, they have to be made of one cell, and then they could possibly have, if they're multicellular, they would have their cells forming tissues, tissues forming organs, organs forming organ systems, and so forth. So that's another characteristic of life, and I'll let you list those over there on your own. And they must be able to pass on their traits to their offspring. Okay, so let's look at this video here.
Have you ever seen those toys that you can put in water for a few days and then they increase in size? They always have this label on the package like grows a million times larger in water. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but they do grow impressively larger. I had one once. It was a pony. I had dreams for it to grow especially large, so to give it plenty of room, it spent several days in a bathtub. And while it did technically grow larger, the dreams I had imagined for it did not really come to be. The fact that it could increase in size sort of gave me some kind of thought in my mind that it just might be alive, because things that are alive do grow, right? Combine that with my overactive imagination, and it was difficult for me to come back to reality that this toy pony may increase in size, but it's not alive. When we talk about biological growth and development, this type of increase in size is not the same thing. And if we're going to truly explore biology, the study of life, it makes it essential that we understand characteristics of things that are alive. Life is difficult to define, but the characteristics of living things can be explored. We want to mention right here, before we get started, that what makes an organism alive still results in a lot of questioning by biologists. Hey, remember, there are many organisms undiscovered on our own planet, and new information revealed in biological sciences all the time. So, this is our disclaimer that this information can change and is still debated. Kind of like what we mentioned in our classification video. This is why we are not going to give a certain numerical value for how many characteristics of life there are, because we do not want to imply that they are in a specific order, or that what we are listing cannot be expanded upon, or that this can't include exceptions that we may not mention. Also, the characteristics we talk about here can certainly be titled differently. See, we're not trying to talk about a list that one would memorize here. Our goal is actually to get you thinking about what it means for an organism to be alive, and characteristics of life that can be explored when trying to study living things. Okay, so let's get started with some characteristics. Organization. We can look at the cell theory here and see that, according to this theory, living organisms are made of cells. Some organisms are unicellular, so they can be made up of just one cell. But more complex organisms, like this pony here, are multicellular and therefore can be made up of many cells, which can be arranged into tissues. The tissues can make up organs. The organs can be part of an organ system. These are biological levels of organization. As for our bathtub grown pony, no cells. Homeostasis. Maintaining a regulated balance is so important for many biological processes to even happen. For example, enzymes typically need a certain pH range to even work correctly. Maintaining homeostasis can mean maintaining a certain temperature and a certain percentage of water concentration. Ponies and your human body have all kinds of feedback systems in place to maintain homeostasis. But even a single celled organism, like an amoeba, relies on its cell membrane to maintain homeostasis internally. Living organisms have regulation of homeostasis, which is not going on here in bathtub grown pony. Metabolism. If you're alive, you need to have some way to capture energy and use energy for processes, including some processes that keep homeostasis, like mentioned previously. Chemical reactions happening in living organisms are part of metabolism. So, just to give some examples of reactions that are part of metabolism in living organisms, plants are autotrophs that can capture light energy to make glucose in a process known as photosynthesis. Animals are heterotrophs that typically need to eat something and then digest it in order to obtain glucose. Both of these example organisms break down glucose in cellular respiration to make ATP energy. Metabolism is happening in this pony, but not in bathtub pony. Reproduction. This can be very simple, like unicellular bacteria, which can copy DNA and split into two, and now you have two bacteria. Or it can be more complex, like this living pony, which involves sperm and egg cells uniting to make a fertilized egg known as a zygote, which will eventually develop into a baby pony. No reproduction for this bathtub grown pony. Growth and development. Living organisms have genetic material to code for development and growth. A baby pony will develop and grow up into a grown up pony because its genetic material contains the instructions for this development and growth. Bathtub grown pony may increase in size due to water entering it, but it's not growing and developing based on genetic instructions. Response to stimuli. Responding to stimuli is often considered a characteristic of life. There can be internal and external stimuli. If this pony feels the need to eat, this can be due to coordination of many body systems internally alerting the pony that it is hungry. If this pony senses danger, this external stimulus may cause it to flee. Not so for a bathtub pony. But you know, a response to a stimulus might not be obvious. I used to have a lot of cacti when I was a kid, and while I wouldn't call them especially exciting when I was a kid, I did notice that if I left them in a windowsill and didn't rotate them, they would bend, at least over a period of a few weeks. That's amazing because they are responding to light. Plants responding to light is a response to a stimulus. Evolution. A working definition of life, summarized by Dr. Gerald Joyce as part of a panel of exobiologists, describes life as, quote, a self sustaining system capable of Darwinian evolution, end quote. Fascinating quote. Many scientists view the process of evolution as a characteristic of life, although this would occur over a period of time. The gene frequencies in a population of living organisms can change over time due to mechanisms such as natural selection. Some genes can code for certain traits that result in higher reproductive fitness, while some genes may code for traits that lower reproductive fitness and therefore may be selected against. Over time, these can result in adaptations. Because the bathtub pony cannot even reproduce in the first place, you won't see this. Characteristics of life are definitely intriguing to explore. Remember that these are characteristics that can be adjusted or potentially have exceptions. Some things are very hard to classify. Take viruses. In our virus video, we talk about how viruses are considered by the majority of scientists to not be living. Viruses, with their genetic material, can reproduce, although they need a host to reproduce. They can evolve, but overall they seem to lack a lot of the other characteristics of life and aren't typically classified as living. It's also interesting to think about the potential of extraterrestrial life, that is, life that is not on Earth. Would it still have these characteristics of life that we have discussed? Sometimes as science we find ourselves with even more questions. Well, that's it for the Amoeba Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.
Okay, so we'll see how adding these videos to my little explanations here, whether you all like to watch those embedded in the lecture or if you'd rather use the hyperlinks and watch them on your own. So we'll decide. So the summary, 7 characteristics of life include responsiveness to the environment, and that's kind of like responding to stimuli, grow and change either on the single cell level or multicellular level, ability to reproduce, unicellular splits into asexual reproduction, or multicellular could involve the production of sperm and egg cells to form a new zygote, and then growth continues by addition of cells. Metabolism, which includes the ability to take in a food source, turn it into energy that can help sustain the living thing. Homeostasis, maintain whatever living structure it has, whether it's a single celled or a multicellular organism, being able to survive and adjust in its environment, has to be made of at least one cell, and it has to be able to reproduce and pass traits on to the offspring. So, I will let you have time to complete your study guide this week. Um, and when you get ready, you can go on to the next video lesson, which will be week 1, day 1, part C. Thanks.